Welcome to The Authority File, the podcast that features conversations about the life cycle of scholarly communication. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice, a publishing division of the Association of College and Research Libraries. This four-part series is brought to you with support from Gale, publisher of 18th Century Collections Online, Part 3. For more than 2 decades, 18th Century Collections Online has been a foundation of global scholarship on the long 18th century, giving researchers access to millions of pages of books, pamphlets, and rare print that shaped the modern world. Now, with ECCO Part 3, those collections are expanding again with 1.7 million pages of new primary sources, including rare and unique miniature books newly digitized for the very first time. This new collection provides researchers with new perspectives on print culture, literacy, craftsmanship, and everyday life in the 1700s. To learn more and request trial access for your library, visit gale.com/echo-3. Again, that's gale.com/ECCO-III. In this series, we're taking a fascinating behind-the-scenes look at how primary sources are brought to life in a digital research environment. More specifically, we'll travel back in time to the 18th century when a unique publication format was all the rage: tiny books. Joining me for this series is Eleanor Leese, Acquisitions Editor for Gale Primary Sources, who explains for us what tiny books are and the careful process of digitizing them for the ECCO Part 3 platform. We'll talk about identification, handling, and imaging techniques, as well as how Gale collaborated with libraries to bring these delicate materials into a contemporary research platform. In this final episode of our series, we expand our discussion into metadata, cataloging, and other quality control considerations for digital primary sources. Okay, so what have been the metadata, cataloging, and quality control considerations for these types of formats?
Wow. So ECCO is a project with enormous amounts of metadata. And we've again, made some thoughtful, hopefully, choices about the metadata. Because the metadata for ECCO, or it's based on the ESTC catalogues, which is a union catalogue. So the information has come from many libraries across the world, and that has sort of been ingested into ECCO. Some of the records in the ESTC include physical information, but that can vary widely, widely or wildly. If it has multiple volumes, you probably just get the volume number. If it's a single volume work, you might get a page number. You might get a page size, you might not.
Wow.
For the individual holdings, you might get information about the physical volume because the ESTC record lists every holding or every known holding of every item. Some of those might include some physical descriptions,
Mm-hmm.
but some of them won't. It really depends on what the individual cataloger at each individual library has captured. So we're working with sort of quite uneven data to start with. So we've tried to standardize that as much as we can, and we've also added in new metadata that our users have asked us for. Frankly, they've been using ECCO for a long time, and they know what they want and what they need to make it more usable. So one of the things that we've added is an author gender filter, which has been complicated to include. And I can talk a bit, if you like, about exactly how we've done that, because there are lots of discussions about how many categories to include and how to assign them.
Yeah, that would be interesting because it's not like you can just go ask a person.
No, it's tricky, and
Right.
not everybody writes under their own name. Not
Mm-hmm.
everybody uses only one name. So the way that we decided to do it was to assign gender as male or female based on first names where they have a history of being very strongly gendered
Mm.
first names, because we are dealing with such an enormous number of authors. So that was sort of the first pass. And then once we'd assigned those, we had, so that was done sort of automatically through an API.
Yep.
And then we had a human researcher, which was sometimes me, sometimes one of my colleagues, and also some contractors that we used to go through line by line and say, can we reasonably assume the gender of this person? Is it a well-known person? Are they using a title which only one gender would be able to use? So if
Hmm.
they're a reverend in the 18th century, we can safely assume that they at least presented as male, if it's the same if they were a doctor.
Hmm.
And then everyone who was left, who we couldn't confidently say was either male or female, has been categorized as unknown. Included in the unknowns were people claiming a gender, but that seemed sketchy. So something written by a good wife. I'm immediately suspicious that someone calling them, someone
Yeah.
writing satire calling themselves a good wife, or an honourable gentleman, equally suspicious of that.
Hmm.
But we find because women's writing in the 18th century is such a lively area of research, having an author gender filter,
Yep.
even an imperfect one, it is something that our users wanted, and so that
Yeah.
we've tried to include. Slightly less complex, but still difficult, was the place of publication.
Hmm.
So the parameters for ECCO are published in English in England and its colonies and territories. But there's something like 30 countries and roughly the same number of languages included in ECCO. Um, and again, they can be a bit tricksy. So we've standardized everything to modern place names just to make searching as easy as possible. And then on the search engine on the back end can match up
Yep.
modern place names with older place names. But we have lots of books that claim to be published in Paris because of, I guess, libel laws, that were actually published in London, and books claiming to be published in London that were actually published elsewhere. So again, a bit of detective work needed to try and work out, and decisions about, do we record it as being published where we think it was actually published, or where it says that it was published?
Hmm.
So those are a couple of the big changes that we've made to the metadata, just to make those aspects more searchable. When it comes to format and size, like with these miniature books,
Right.
again, that's tricky because the information that we have is fairly patchy from the ESTC. So what we decided to do was, where we have dimensions, we've added that to the notes so that it's searchable. And we've also tagged the miniature books as being miniature books. So you will be able to search in ECCO and find them all, hopefully. And there's something similar with broadsheets and ballads. We're working on finding a way to make those more visible. But you get into sort of existential and philosophical questions about, what is a pamphlet? if, if you want to be able to search for a pamphlet, what do we include and what do we not include? And so those sorts of conversations are ongoing. And ECCO's been around for 20 years and
Hmm.
isn't going anywhere. So those sorts of conversations are ongoing as we see what we're adding as well with ECCO 3 and the different types of material that are coming to the fore, about how do we describe those and how do we make them searchable for our users.
Right. Well, and I imagine as sort of the field of research evolves, so does the
Mm.
the metadata that's used to support that, I guess.
Yeah, the meeting
Yeah.
that ended with "What is a pamphlet?" was one for the one that sticks in the memory.
Right, right. So are you collaborating a lot with sort of library staff, for example, or archivists, to kind of work on those challenges?
Yes, so
Yeah.
we're always talking to our users for ECHO. For example, we're sort of going to all of the 18th century society conferences,
Mm,
and because we have trials of ECHO at the moment, we're starting to get feedback from scholars who are actually using it, and looking at the different types of content that are there. So we're sort of shaping our decisions based on uh, what they're seeing and
yeah.
how they're using it and feedback that we're getting. But we're also talking to sort of the different teams within Gale. Obviously, acquisitions is just one part of it, and then the imaging teams. But then there are also the people who work on the platform, and those sides of it who have their own conversations with users about how they want to be able to use the platform.
Hmm. Excellent.
So it's very much a team effort.
Yeah, I can imagine. So, talk about some of the more surprising aspects of using Echo and things that you have found in the collection.
Sure. Okay, so my favorite thing that I like to talk about when people ask me about what sort of things that you can find in Echo is the time that I stumbled across a caterpillar plague. um, so in our marketing materials for Echo, we have lots of images of insects because we have some really beautiful, highly illustrated sort of natural history books. In the 18th century, they loved collecting butterflies and moths and beetles. And then you would have sort of a cabinet of curiosities, and you would look up what you'd found in these big illustrated tomes, and then you'd write out your little labels. And then, if you were the type of gentleman who had a drawing room, everyone would come to your drawing room and look at your collection. So we use lots of these images in our marketing material because they're very beautiful. And I was playing around with some of the digital humanities tools that are built into Echo. So we have term frequencies, and I was playing around with them just to see what I came up with. So I decided to plug insects into the term frequency, and it came up with some graphs, and I sort of added a few more words. So I added in butterflies and moths, and I was interested in wasps and weevils. You get lots of weevils in documents from the Navy. Um,
Huh.
and I found a blip. And I thought, why am I getting this blip? So I sort of put words in and took words out, and the blip was definitely to do with insects, and it wasn't to do with beetles. It did seem to do with butterflies and moths. So I think it was 1782, but I could be wrong. Um, so I went looking through the documents, linked through to the documents from that year where we had the blip. And it turns out there was a plague of caterpillars in London in 1782. And London was kind of in a bit of a panic anyway, because there had been the Gordon riots a couple of years before. There was military stationed in the parks. They were still in the city keeping the police. And then one morning, everyone woke up and there were these sticky white webs across the whole of the city. Like every hedgerow, every bush, every tree was covered in these sticky white webs.
Oh my
And you
gosh.
read about what people were talking about these, and they seemed reluctant to believe that they were just there were caterpillars that had gone into their cocoons,
Hmm.
but they seemed reluctant to believe this. And there was talk of plagues and pestilence, and everyone was expecting the world to end. And the caterpillars did eat their way through quite a lot of London. It wasn't a great situation, but it wasn't a plague.
Right.
Um, but you could really feel the tension in the city from the reactions. And then some of the
Wow.
interesting things that you find in the parish authorities are saying, well, we're already paying for the soldiers to be stationed here to keep the police. like, do we need to pay to get rid of the pestilence as well? Like, surely, surely both of these things can't be our responsibility.
Right.
But it was the first time that really I'd used digital humanities tools and really surprised myself with how precise they can be at finding something in the archive that you didn't know was there.
Hmm.
So that's my favourite thing that I found in ECCO is the Great Caterpillar Plague of I think 1782.
Right, right. Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing that. And that is all the time we have. So, Eleanor, thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a blast.
You just heard from Eleanor Lease, Acquisitions Editor for Gale Primary Sources. This four-part series is brought to you with support from Gale, publisher of 18th Century Collections Online, Part 3. For more than 2 decades, 18th Century Collections Online has been a foundation of global scholarship on the long 18th century, giving researchers access to millions of pages of books, pamphlets, and rare print that shaped the modern world. Now, with ECCO Part 3, those collections are expanding again with 1.7 million pages of new primary sources, including rare and unique miniature books newly digitized for the very first time. This new collection provides researchers with new perspectives on print culture, literacy, craftsmanship, and everyday life in the 1700s. To learn more and request trial access for your library, visit gale.com/echo-3. Again, that's gale.com/ECCO-III. The Authority File podcast is brought to you every week by Choice and produced and edited by digital media producer Sabrina Kofer. Underwriting opportunities are directed by Melissa Carr and Ryan King. For more information about sponsorship opportunities, download the Choice Media Kit at choice360.org. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.